Hello, everyone, and welcome to Office Hours. This is the place we gather here every single day and have for thousands of days, it seems like, to talk about modern web-based production. It's where you can submit your questions about media creation and distribution, really literally anything having to do with those topics. You can put them in 24/7. The simple rules are one question per submission. And remember, somebody's going to read it out loud, so try to make things simple and only one question per entry. You can use our back-end system, we call it Mukana, to not only put questions into the show, but vote on those questions, and that's kind of how we program things. The questions with the most votes we get to quicker and spend more time discussing. If you're watching on YouTube and want to do it quick and easy, you can use the QR code that's appearing on the screen right now. Shoot that with your phone or tablet or whatever you have that reads QR codes, and it will let you put your question in quickly. Someone will take a look at it in the back end, make sure it's formed correctly, and then with luck, and if we're not too late into the show, we'll try to add it into the queue, but remember that voting process, so it may or may not make it into that show. If not, any questions that are left over at the end of the show, they get pushed back to you in your notes field, and they come from there into the next show. Okay, all the business is taken care of. It's time to dive into questions. So, Courtney, what do we have today on tap?
Well, Bill, first up is from the smallest, biggest little city in the world, Reno, Nevada. John Snyder asks, what are some considerations or options for hosting and publishing a podcast made primarily for company employees, but available for public consumption? Expected biweekly episodes and audience in the low hundreds. A recording is already handled.
Okay, Courtney, do you want to start us off and give me an idea?
I'm not sure what he's looking about as far as consideration, since he says recording is already handled. Maybe he's already got the technical setup set with the correct microphones and the positions for, and the room and the acoustics and the mixer for podcasting. So if you have all that stuff handled, the next consideration is to find someone to host, if not yourself, who is entertaining at least, and not too dour and single-noted, especially if this is fairly dry information that you have to be presenting. Corporate information can get very dull and boring if you don't lighten it up a little bit. You got to keep it clean since the world can watch. You got to make sure that there are no, you got to vet all the information that you're going to present, since it's going to be public facing, although not primarily, for, company secrets, any trade secrets, that information that could be used against you in marketing has to be carefully vetted so that you make sure that that information is not revealed. And I would involve one or two of the employees occasionally, every week. Find a new one to guest host or answer questions, or just to do a little mini profile of one employee. That would keep the employees interested, as they will maybe get a time in the hot seat there and get a little exposure. So that might keep them interested in listening, because it's pretty hard to put out a biweekly podcast with mainly corporate information or company information and keep it interesting and keep people listening.
Marty, yes.
Well, yes, John's question is rather broad. So to cover kind of most of the bases, I'll say that when planning any kind of programming, there are three considerations. There's the technical, there's the ergonomic, and then there's the programming itself, the content. Courtney covered a lot of the content. I will imagine that most of the technical stuff is probably handled. You know that you need microphones, you need a mixer that's capable of handling a podcast with potentially remote guests, so something with mix minus. The ergonomic is really important too, which really gets crossed over with the technical. You need a quiet space. You need a space that is acoustically conditioned so that you're not dealing with reflections and room tone, so that you can isolate all of the microphones and not have a lot of bleed and not get a lot of room noise. And people need to generally sit around a table so that they can see each other when they're talking, and particularly seeing the host who is running the show. There are a number of considerations when doing a podcast. You can probably find a number of images of podcasting studios by just searching for that term podcast studio and see how they're set up, see how they're arranged. Take a look at the walls for conditioning. Take a look at where the windows are, if there are windows in the room. You can probably find a lot of information about that, but pay attention to the details.
There you go. Nigel.
Yes, I think I've done practically all of what you talk about here, but never at the same time. So I've done biweekly stuff, and I have to tell you the most important thing I found was to make sure I had an employee all but full-time on that. That is a lot of content to produce every other week. So there needs to be someone it's not their nighttime job to do the programming that Marty put together, and I think that's essential. The second thing is try and work out a sequence for the show. It might feel repetitive to you, but to the audience, knowing that there's going to be this, then the employee, then this, then this, then this, that sequence is very comforting, I think, and will help them program it. On the question of inside out, outside in, I think it's a lot easier to do a podcast for the customer side that the employees get value for than it is to do one for the employees that the customers get value for. And so I've always opted really for the first of those, which is I produced a customer-facing thing that the employees then educate. By the way, best way to train the sales team is to tell them what you tell the clients with that podcast, because they won't read any of the sales materials, but they might listen to that in the car or watch that on a plane or something. The moment you decide to go the other way and go an employee thing to customers, then you are, as Courtney outlined, touching on some live wires about things you do and don't want to communicate. Having said that, every time I've done an internal podcast, we've always done it with an ear of what happens if this went outside. And that's different than saying it's good for outside. So I would really encourage you to pick one or the other and manage it that way. And the better way is to think about what would be good for the consumers, that the internal is the second audience, and that might be the safer solution.
Jeffrey Powers.
I'm going to throw a wrinkle in here because, John, aren't you in the healthcare section? And if this is a healthcare podcast or dealing with employees in healthcare, then you're going to have to really consider HIPAA involved in this. So in this case, if that is the case, then I would highly suggest an outside source as your producer and your voice of reason, that if something is said during the show, that they can stop you. Because I think it's very important that if something is said wrong, and this is not a live show, that everybody should be stopped at that moment to correct, because if you don't do that and you continue on, a lot of times it gets missed, especially if somebody's editing. You see that blank space, it's time to edit. There's something wrong here. And so fixing that from there is an important part. So I would highly suggest having somebody that knows their stuff on there that would help out with that podcast if you can swing that.
Jeff Francis.
I'm going to reiterate a piece of advice I heard about podcasts, and probably goes for any kind of media, which is if you're going to start this, plan to throw away the first 3 to 6 episodes so that you kind of get a feel for what your voice is and the style, and get that all out of the way so that your first content is actually good content.
Yeah, from my experience here with Office Hours, I would very much like to demand that they throw away the first 10 to 15 times I appeared here, because I had no idea what I was doing. And you do settle into your style and the rest of that only after time. John, it sounds like an exciting possibility. I hope it works real well for you. Next question.
All right, next one comes in from Douglas Carmichael. He says, for an apartment closet where I can't use a 19-inch rack, would the UniFi Cloud Gateway Max still be a good choice for a 2 gigabits per second symmetrical connection despite its limited 1.5 gigabits per second IPS support? And he has a link there.
Jeffrey Powers has some ideas. Jeffrey.
I don't see why not, as long as the closet is well vented and you're not blocking the vents inside the UniFi Max there. And of course, cabling into and out of the closet. I think we've talked about this a few times before, and it's always, especially if you're renting, you're always getting permission from the landlord to do anything that's going to change the look or feel of course of your place. So keep that in mind. But yeah, if it fits and it's well vented, why not?
Yeah, I think a lot of people have little kind of mini server rooms now in an out-of-the-way closet or cabinet or kitchen shelf or somewhere. So fingers crossed for you. Next question.
Comes from Austin, Texas, and Paul Wallace, and he asks, today OBSBOT is launching its newest AI-powered 4K webcam, the OBSBOT Meet 2, lighter with colors compared to the old one, and he has a link there.
Lighter with colors. I've never seen that as a pitch for a camera. Stylish. Nigel, help us out here.
Yes, but it doesn't have the go faster stripe on it, which I think is essential to it. So here's the original odd spot, and your spot that it's really a very typical PTZ type thing. We're going to something like this, and this will show you one of the stunning new colors that your color specialist is advising the color of the year. Actually, I don't know what the Pantone color of the year is, which should make that the bonus question. It seems to me that the big thing here is that they're moving from a PTZ to a square box without a moving arm on it, because they're going to let the reframing be done by the AI. So that's where I start to get nervous, because even on my Link 360, on my Insta360 Link, the first thing I do is turn off the reframing and the moving of it once I've got it in position. So the specs will be different, I'm sure. I don't know if it's the same piece of silicon. I haven't had a chance to research that. But the big significant difference is they're moving away from a moving PTZ arm to doing it in AI.
I'm going to guess there were a couple of meetings before they named that camera Ice Blue. Jeffrey Powers.
So the Meet actually it's not the first version. This is the second version of the Meet. They did have a similar action cam style Meet, which they discontinued, and I have it somewhere around here. It's kind of still in packing boxes, but so it's pretty much the same thing as the first version, except now with colors and of course extra, more technology in there, updated technology, and the ability to connect it up in multiple ways. I'm trying to figure out if there was a battery in this one. So if there is a battery, then you might be able to use it like an action camera. But I definitely, it's an interesting thing right there.
And Marty, yes.
And it's not the only new product that they've introduced. They also have a new PTZ camera called the Tiny 2, which updates the first one, which is the Tiny, and then they have one or two others. So they're updating a lot of the line here, and for $179, that's a really good little desktop PTZ camera. And auto tracking, auto framing, is if you move around a lot, you're here and there, then it might be nice to have that auto framing, have the camera follow you within the frame. The PTZ is really nice because then you can actually create presets, whether you want a wide frame or a narrow frame or this chair or that chair. It's a lot more flexible.
Courtney Gooden.
Yeah, the PTZ also offers features like being able to flip down and show your desktop and invert the image, I think, which is a handy thing to have if you're an educator. But to handle the problem that Nigel speaks of, where it's constantly reframing out of a flat 4K image, which it's constantly blowing up a small window out of that, it ought to have a mode, since it has two microphones in it, I think, for sound field steering, that it ought to be able to have a mode where you just turn off the auto framing unless you say, "Hey, I'm walking here," and then it frames you up and then it stops.
With a Brooklyn accent, certainly. Jeffrey Powers, you want to finish us up here?
With a Brooklyn accent, no. But this is actually the Tiny 2 Lite The differences between the two is whereas the Tiny 2 has, it actually has a mount that detaches magnetic, the mount is attached onto the Tiny 2 light. And there's a series of pins on the Tiny 2, I'm assuming for some sort of accessory cage that they could put out, but this does not have that. So that's that. As for the Meet, looking at some of the specs, yeah, it's definitely going to be something that is not, there's a lot of people that get really confused when the camera starts to move with them, and they don't like that. So something like this might be perfect for, especially for if you're doing at-home kits. You have that camera just set up and ready to go. And yeah, you could do a little bit of zoom in if you're doing a 1080p video and you're using a 4K camera. Then you have a little bit of leeway to zoom in without having too much degradation in the video. So this would be perfect for something like that.
Heading off to the next question.
Andy Kokendorfer from Vieira, Florida asks, I'm always impressed with the vocal treatment on the 20,000 Hertz podcasts by De-facto Sound. Any tips on how to get this vocal clarity and warmth? Thanks.
Chris Jellin, you want to help us out?
Yeah, sure. So, no words. So I'm not familiar with this exact podcast, but I would just say for anybody who's trying to do this, a couple things to bear in mind. One, the space that you're doing this in is it's paramount. It is one of the most important things in the equation. Make sure that you have good room treatment. If people don't know what good room treatment sounds like, go sit in your car and talk. See how that feels and get an idea of that. That's kind of a basic thing. It's kind of a basic reference for what you're trying to accomplish in your room. And if you don't have a good room, maybe record in your car. But you want to get a correct space for big, warm vocals. Frequently, these are dynamic microphones. Frequently, there's some specific classic microphones in that realm, like Shure SM7s, RE20s, things like that, where you can get a lot of good proximity effect, which is essentially the increased bass response into a microphone starting at about 3 feet to the sound source, right? Or to the microphone. So you can kind of just... If you get all these ingredients, they come out to a wonderful outcome. Also, remember, there's a huge amount of back-end processing that can happen, compression, EQ, things like this, and there's a lot that goes into this. So learning these stages and learning really what they do and how to utilize them is how that end result really happens.
Jeffrey Powers.
Yeah, you have radio perfect and then podcast perfect. To add to Chris's thing, I actually did this. I actually posted a TikTok on this. Since I'm building out a new studio, I just moved. I got lucky. I found a place that actually has some sound-treated ceiling tiles, but I'm not totally satisfied with this sound just yet. So what I did was I pulled out my phone, and I just basically recorded myself without any microphones on it, just a straight up recording. I walked around the room and then I talked. And I did a loud voice, I did a soft voice. You want to hear the bounce, and you want that reference to what you're doing. So let's say you put down a foam for bass trapping or anything like that. You can walk around and you can take that same video with and then compare the two from when it was untreated to when it's treated to see if that's the sound that you like. And then you can kind of experiment with it. So I would highly suggest using your phone's camera and microphone to capture the sound that you have. And then once you've made the changes, how that sounds different from the original, and then make fixes from there.
Chris, you want to come back in?
Yeah, just to add another thing, if people are trying to really find and locate problem areas in their rooms, go around and clap. You want to close all the doors for the room. Remember, if you have an open door to your room, sound is escaping that. So it's not giving you an accurate reference, and the room will change when that door is shut. In my mix room, when doors are all shut, it just seals, and all of a sudden low end is incredibly tight and perfect for me, and I don't have to guess at all. When they're open, it's absolutely a difference. So when you're trying to set this stuff up, as I'm actually designing multiple studios right now and do this very regularly, walk around the room and clap. Okay, you want to understand that just by default, the way that these sound waves end up is they're going to accumulate by default in your corners, right? And they're going to in two different ways, okay? One at the floor and one at the ceiling. And then they're going to force themselves down. So when you do bass trapping, what you're doing essentially is grabbing a panel and you are laying it evenly across, right? So you essentially you've got a triangle and you're just walling it off. The idea is it's open bottom and top. So when sound waves are forced by physics, this will happen. They're going to be forced down that corner and they're going to hit each other. Right? They're going to stop each other, and they're also going to be absorbed by the back of that panel. That's effective bass trapping, right? So this stuff doesn't have to be really, really high tech or really expensive to be really utilitarian. I'll tell you that the thing where acoustic treatment gets mostly expensive is where you want to make it look good. The second you want it to be aesthetically nice, it gets much more so, but you can achieve a lot with packing blankets, things like this. Anyone who's using packing blankets, things of this nature, fire hazard is paramount, okay? This stuff is really important. You need to pay attention to this. Do not have blankets hanging over any kind of electrical, anything. It is like safety before anything. Safety before sound quality, always. So just look at these things and understand that the big issue in what a lot of people are dealing with is they're setting up studios in bedrooms, right, or in small rooms. So one thing to just really bear in mind is any parallels this is where reflections really, really are created, where they really are given a place to thrive. Okay. And so it's important. You're trying to kill parallels. And also, just if you think about how things work, they're going to hit a source and they're going to slap off something else and then they're going to bounce back to you, right? Things are ping ponging. If you play your stereo in there and it sounds like it's coming from everywhere, that's room, right? That's room acoustics just bouncing around you. So what you want to do, especially behind your speakers, is treat behind your speakers. They are going to rear fire. That means they're hitting you, then they're also hitting behind them. That's bouncing back afterwards, right? Now you're hearing your sound twice, not at the same time. There's a delay, right? So this can happen all over the place. So this is what you're thinking of. Carpets, that thick rugs, things like that, they really can soak up sound. So just kind of be open to what's really happening in the room, and you're looking for any kind of extension. When you go around and you clap, if it keeps going, right, really, really look up at your ceiling. This is frequently where the issues lie. Don't forget about the ceiling. It's really, I don't know if you can see a little bit of mine, but that's all treatment. My entire ceiling and all these panels that I have 3-inch panels that are hung around the entire room. And it's a mastering studio and it works really well. So
since this is Audio Day, we're going to keep on this for a tiny bit more. Jeff Francis, thoughts?
I'm just going to take off what Chris is saying about acoustic treatment. My little home studio here that I set up, I had the speaker set up. Everything was great. I worked in it. And then I actually bought some nice looking 2x4 panels to put on the side walls and the back walls behind the speakers. And I turned the speakers on and immediately I was like, wait, my speakers are slightly different in level. My center was ever so slightly off. And I went and I tweaked and I brought the right speaker up, and I think it was about 1.5 dB. But as soon as I had that treatment, I could instantly hear that my center was slightly to the left. And before that, with the treatment, everything was bouncing around and it was just not clear. So that treatment really just cleans things up, tightens up the room. So I'm just echoing, Chris has got it.
This is Sound Day, so we're spending a lot of time on these sound questions. We do have a lot of questions, though, so we're going to move along. Next question.
Next question comes in from Abe Barrera in Flowery Branch, wherever that is, looking for an arm or mount for my laptop that I can attach to a varipole. Any recommendations?
Marty Atias.
So a varipole is a pole that goes from floor to ceiling, and so it's a vertical pole, and that tension between the floor and ceiling is what keeps the pole upright. When you got a caution here. So to answer your question, yeah, there are a couple of things. The first thing that came to mind is from RAM Mount. RAM Mount does a lot of offers a lot of ways to mount a laptop in a vehicle or any place else, and you can mix and match parts for custom mounting. So this one will attach the little U-bolts at the bottom. This is a swing arm, so that can go to the back. You can get different length arms. But the caution that I want to give you is that when you start putting lateral weight on that vertical pole, the leverage forces are going to be significant. And so you're going to unbalance that pole quite a bit. You're going to have to provide a lot of tension or a way of securing that pole very, very securely. A better idea, if you have the space, is to get a device like this or another device, something like this from Onstage Stands, that allows you to mount your laptop on a stand that's on the floor, and that way the weight of the laptop is centered over the pole. Here's another one from Pro X. So they're available from a variety of places. Just be really careful about safety on that.
Courtney Gooden.
Yeah, like Marty was saying, you probably want to put a couple of drywall screws through a base plate onto the ceiling to keep that spring-loaded post from coming loose. I have a similar situation in my music room where I'm out of surface space in there. So I had a laptop for a while, and now I have a mini mixer on one of these. And this is an arm that attaches to a vertical pole. The thing that you want to look at, there's some of them that have the spring-loaded arm, kind of like a microphone arm, which has to be adjusted to the weight of the laptop, and they're kind of finicky. And you don't want something like that where you go to type on it and it moves, when you go to type on it, it moves away from your fingers. So this one is from Mount It, and it's a pole-mounted laptop holder. You'll notice it has a couple of adjustments. You adjust the height on the pole here, so you put it at a comfortable height for your working height first. And then it has a double articulated arm, so it's got two elbows here. So the nice thing is you can push it away from you, and the horizontal arms will bend and move it away from you. But you can lock them off, and you can lock the laptop at a comfortable angle for you. That's another thing. And what I did is I put a little 8-input mixer in my music room above the synths, so I can just pull that out, mix with it, and push it out of the way if I don't want it. And it has adjustable clamps on the side of it for the thickness of your laptop and/or a mixer or anything else you want to mount.
Jeffrey Powers.
Yeah, a lot of things I'm going to totally agree. I actually have two varipoles, one here. I just put them up. You can put them up vertically or horizontally, like one of these curtain rods that you can turn and tighten up. But keep in mind that the building settles and those things will fall off. So yeah, I totally agree that you want to put down nails. For the laptop suggestion, if you completely understand the risk, I would highly recommend Vivo, VIVO. You can find them on Amazon. They make a lot of great stuff for whatever you need, whether it be a laptop, a light, or anything like that. A lot of clamps. And but if you get anything, make sure you get something that locks the laptop down. So even if the arm, let's say the pole doesn't fall down, maybe the arm just decides to go this way, your laptop is not tumbling to the ground.
Next question.
Next question comes in from Jonas Dottel in Stuttgart, Germany. He says, from a comm/audio engineer, what features do you need to have on a comm system? And what features would you wish you had or wish existed?
Craig Kadoki is going to start us off here. Craig? Whoops, you're muted, Craig. Nope, it was not in Zoom. It looks like there's something somewhere else. Let's see. Yeah, we're not getting you, unfortunately. And yours was the only hand raised at this point, unless somebody else wants to weigh in.
Here's where a comm system would come in.
We have one. Craig may or may not be on it at the moment, but for some reason, I see the red muting now. So you're Zoom muted, if nothing else, but now you're off of that, and it's still not happening. So you've got an open circuit somewhere between the microphone and us on these things happen. This is a live show, and this is the 1,000 natural shocks that shows are
we have an air gap, Bill.
There we go. Exactly. Very hard for those electrons to make the jump. All right. I think we're going to have to move on. Jonas. Marty's going to dive in on this. Marty?
Yeah, I'll take a shot at that one. Okay. So for comms, comms is really important. It's a major part of your event, of your show. When you have multiple people working at an event, you need to be able to communicate between people. You have camera people, you have sound people, you have lighting people. Don't know what kind of show this is, but if you have a crew, you need to be able to talk to them during the event, and that's the most important thing. And you need to be able to talk to them privately so that the audience is not hearing you shouting across the room or shouting into your microphone. And if it's a noisy event, the earpieces, the headphones that you're wearing need to be able to block out that noise so you can hear what's being communicated to you. Now, if you have groups of people in your crew, like you have 3 camera people and 3 lighting people, you may want to have the ability within your comm system to put people into groups so that you can talk to only your video people and only your camera people and only your sound people. And if there's an A1 who is mixing and then he may have an assistant who is wrangling microphones, you want to be able to have a way for them to be able to talk privately and not to everybody else so that you keep other channels quiet. So think about what your application is and how many people you need to communicate to and how many people or whether you need to talk in groups privately and whether you can use a wired comms or whether you need wireless comms or a combination between them.
Chris Gillen?
Yeah, I mean, there's for this. I mean, there's obviously a bunch of different options. The units that I was always the most familiar with were ClearComm. That was the brand, and essentially, when the whole idea of comms, right, in a live event is you might be at a very, very loud environment, just with a lot of chaos. It could be, flashing lights, things like this. It could be something it's difficult to get people's attention and all that. So you want to really make sure that. Essentially, the way this works, if people don't really understand, is that you have like a main unit, okay, which usually will have some talk button call features for like counterpart comms, right? So the whole idea is you have your 2 locations and you need to beacon, whoever's over on the other side. There will be a main unit and there will be an actual flashing beacon with it that will literally just light up and flash, it'd be a little silent siren that will really grab your attention in the middle of a loud concert or, whatever the program material calls for. But that's kind of the basic feature. These units have proprietary headsets with microphones, so they're very loud. There's volume adjustments for everyone, and then it's usually just a simple, like a push button for talk, and you could leave it pushed in and just have a conversation, and you press it again to kind of silence the microphone. I would say for anybody getting these systems, make sure that you turn your microphone off because it's possible for you to be done talking, you set it down, and then the mic is just kind of feeding back into the headset on the other party's side. So that's I don't know if that's helpful, but that's my experience with comms.
We've all been there on a comm system when somebody didn't mute and put their headset down on the table. Everybody goes, "Oh, no." Anyway, Craig appears to be back. Craig, are you there?
Hi there. Can you hear me now?
Yay! We made it, Craig. Awesome.
Yeah. So joys of, I don't know what that was. Anyway, restart something and it works. So one thing, I have a fairly elaborate intercom system in the theater that I work in, and we have some very specific needs that are different than some of the live events that like the industrial and corporate stuff. So one of the things that we have is we have an output from our intercom system that goes into an archival record system. So when we do an archival video of one of our shows, we can include comms in it, which is a very important thing for some shows. And we also have, we have a FreeSpeak wireless comm system, and we can inject into it program sound on its own separate channel, separate volume control, so that anybody backstage can hear the main program. And that's really important when people are following along with what's happening on stage. So there's a couple things like that that are really interesting, used like more edge use cases. And we can also set up with a number of the base stations you can set up on the wireless system a button on our belt packs that triggers the backstage paging system, so you can inject into a completely different system. There's also ways to do that to walkie-talkies. So there's a couple of other interesting ideas of what can be used with intercoms.
Excellent. So glad we got you fixed. Jeff Francis is going to wrap things up for us.
Mickey came into the chat and mentioned, since he's an audio engineer and this is audio day, one thing us audio engineers like on comms is a call light, because oftentimes if we're focused on mixing a show, we need both of our ears open and don't need to hear chatter of stage manager and lighting cues and all that. And so when someone needs to get the attention of audio, they need to be able to get our attention when we've taken our headset off, which is often the case. So a call light is really important.
Yeah, and your thought about private lines versus party lines. Courtney?
One thing we haven't addressed is wishes yet. I wish, as was pointed out, a problem, people leaving the microphone open. I wish there was a console somewhere with the comms operator that would indicate whose mic is unmuted and have the ability to digitally mute that microphone from a central comms location. Would be a great feature to have, so that you could remotely mute someone who's left their headset unmuted and laying on a table somewhere.
Yeah, it's an issue when you leave it open and you have another signal injected into it. It's also because you're often working in very quiet things and people need to whisper because they're on camera or close to it. They turn up everything very loudly, and that means that if somebody takes their headset off and that mic hits a tabletop, it's like, oh gosh, that really was annoying to everybody on the crew. So yeah, we've run into that a lot. And again, we're on audio day and this is an important topic. So Marty, you want to come back in and do a little bit more?
Yeah, actually, Courtney, that does exist. And on a large show, you will have somebody whose job it is to manage comms. And they will be sitting in front of a computer screen that can see all of the comms channels, all of the comms units, and they will be able to manage who is able to talk to who is able to hear whom, and manage all the groups, as I mentioned before, and be able to turn microphones off if they're inadvertently left on. One other consideration is the type of control panel that you make available. So people who are on stage, walking around, on cameras, they may have a belt pack, but people at the tech desk, like producers and directors, and the A1 will have a rack-mounted panel that will have a series of buttons on them that are programmable to talk to specific people or to specific groups. So planning the hardware is also another important aspect of planning out your system.
So much good information here, but I'm stressed only because we have a lot of questions in the queue. I want to get to as many of them as possible. So we're going to move on here, and we'll try to keep things as tight as possible so we can get to as many of your questions, listeners, as possible. Listeners and viewers, next question.
Next question comes in from Jacksonville, Florida, and Robert White asked, when placing speakers in a banquet hall, how high do you place the bottom of the 15-inch powered speakers, 6 feet or 7 feet, especially when considering a client that likes to walk the floor with their wireless microphone?
Marty, can you help us out?
Sure. So didn't say which speaker, so I just pulled up a picture of a random 15-inch loudspeaker. And what I want to point out here is there's a woofer and then there's a horn. The woofer on most of these speakers is omnidirectional. As you get lower in frequency, the cabinets cannot provide the kind of directional control that you can with mids and high frequencies. So the horn is actually the part of the speaker that you want to worry about in terms of height. And just to give you an idea, oops, where'd it go? There we go. So you'll notice that in this image, the bottom of the speaker is over everybody's heads, but you'll notice the line showing the dispersion of the horn in the vertical plane. So you'll notice that the upper and lower lines show the total vertical dispersion angle of the speaker. And the dotted line is the center line, which is directly on axis. And below the center line, you have most of the sound. You have half of the sound of the speaker, putting sound where people are standing or sitting, and that's an important distinction, whether your audience is standing or sitting. But you also want to notice that above the center line, the other half of the sound is going out into space where there is nobody except walls and ceilings that the sound can reflect off of. So a lot of times, or some of the better loudspeakers will actually have the ability to tilt the speaker down some, so that you're directing more of the sound to where the people are. But and like here's another view of this in the vertical angle. So different loudspeakers have different dispersion angles, and that's something you need to look at in the specs. There's a horizontal dispersion angle and a vertical dispersion angle, and you want to be sure that these are going to be able to cover the dimensions of your audience area.
Jeffrey Powers.
I have 2 words for you. Feedback destroyer. You don't need to have one, but you can also get like a 32-channel EQ and be able to squelch some of those sounds if he decides to walk in front of the speaker. But then tell him, don't walk in front of the speaker. Don't do it. Placing the speakers as far apart from each other, it really depends on what you were doing. Are we talking a band? Are we talking a TED Talk type thing where people are going to be sitting down on a stage? I don't like to set up for the room. I like to set up for an area in the room. And as Marty said, a lot of these speakers have a tilt down option. And so I always set those speakers so it captures up the small part of the room. And a lot of times, especially with music, it helps with any type of bartenders that are in the back because they're not hearing that noise as much because the focus is on the stage and the area where everybody's learning than anything. So with that, placing those speakers far apart from each other will help him go in the middle without the squelching. And then, of course, the microphone itself is a very important factor. Try to use a cardioid or a supercardioid type microphone so you don't have, it's directional and goes as he's talking like this. You don't hear anything beyond that.
Crystalline.
Oh man. So, all right. First off this is a ballroom, right? That's the idea here is that, so this is already like probably the worst acoustic setting that you can be in, right? Or one of them. It's long standing waves, things, everything is pretty inefficient in outcome of what you're trying to achieve there. So honestly, the difference in sound quality is probably not very much between 6 and 7 feet. However, feedback is absolutely a thing. Understand that like those 2 speakers most likely are not doing the job that you're thinking they're going to do, right? So this is like where it's really important to kind of piggyback on some other good comments, to really look at zones in the room, right? And just kind of look at really what is trying to be achieved here. Remember, if you have 2 tiny speakers and they're spread really far apart, it sounds horrible. It really, I mean, it's a very weak thing with a lot of just hollow, empty zone in the middle of it. It feels very unexciting and usually just kind of you're hearing the bad outcomes more so than anything else. It's the most unusable stuff in a bad spot. So if you want to try and get, if you're using just 2, that's speakers on a stick is what we call that. You want to make sure that you can kind of get those in a spot where they can really feed into a zone where it's really being heard just the most that you can, because in these situations, is someone walking around a lot? Is someone going to be walking directly in front of the speakers? Things like that. And you want to just set these things up for efficiency in that way. So,
next question.
Next question comes in from Zach Stallsmith in Chautauqua, New York. He says, I work in a school, and we are in the midst of so many updates. Students broadcast announcements from a studio to the smartboards with HDMI in the classrooms via Cat6 lines. Is there any way to send one signal via NDI to multiple decoders?
Courtney, can you help him?
Well, I was going to answer a different way. Maybe Marty has a solution for the NDI. You know, in a lot of classrooms, they have TVs. Now, I'm not sure if these smart boards are based around a television set with an ATSC tuner in them. But what we used to do on set a lot of times is anytime we had to distribute a custom video signal to a whole bunch of monitors, and we didn't know how many monitors or where they were going to be, we'd use something called an ATSC encoder or modulator, which is something like this, that takes basically a feed from an antenna, and that takes in one port, and it digitizes an HDMI input, and it modulates it on a ATSC or QAM channel. So that goes out via RF, via the antenna connection to all the TVs that you can hook up to it. You can hook up as many as you want over a distribution amplifier or splitter to multiple TVs. And that way you just tune in the message channel on each TV, you assign it to an unused TV channel, and that way they can tune it in. And you just have to worry about running a single cable, and you can daisy chain it between monitors or go to a splitter, a distribution amplifier further down the way and hit multiple monitors. So that's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is to have if they're not on a normal internet type connection, in other words, Ethernet connection, is to use a closed loop system like HD-Base-T, and there are these distribution amplifiers that you can get that have a HDMI input, then they have multiple Cat6 outputs. Now these use a thing called HD-Base-T, so they encode that video signal into a proprietary type signal that goes out over Cat6. It's not switched over a network, but you can have multiple outputs going to multiple monitors, and it's a direct connection. Now, maybe Marty can tell us about that NDI feature over a network.
Marty, real quick.
Yeah, indeed. There is the Bird Dog Play. This is a small little box that has a network connection and an HDMI output, and it's powered by a USB-C power supply, and that's all this thing does is it decodes NDI to HDMI output. It's $150. That is a way to do what you are asking.
Next question.
Next one comes in from John Nicholas in Concord, California. It says, I'm streaming a show to YouTube over RTMP and to a Zoom meeting. The Zoom audio feed is livestream bus via DVS, and I have original sound turned on. The YouTube feed sounds fine, but the Zoom feed sounds swirly and tinny. Any ideas?
Jeff Francis, start us out here.
So real quick, John, since you have clean audio to YouTube, you know you're creating something clean. So either you have a second bus coming into Zoom somehow. So Zoom will take a multi-channel audio interface and mix those together. So if you have that same audio or a portion of that audio coming in as well, you could be getting comb filtering. The other thing is to confirm your original sound settings and to confirm that every time you go into that meeting, you turn original sound on, because it will shut off automatically. So please check those things, because it sounds like you're getting some kind of comb filtering or the Zoom noise cancellation.
Craig Kadoki.
Just echoing Jeff, and that was my point, was going to be about the it's actually a double switch for original sound. You have to turn it on in preferences and then turn it on in the meeting. The switch in preferences still just, I think, gives you the option in the meeting to put it on there.
Next question.
Next question comes in from Gabriel Ng in Malaysia. It says, in an event where a mic is shared between different speakers, would you ride the gain knob to manage different speaking levels to ensure proper levels hit your signal chain processing, or maintain gain and ride the faders? Marty, what do you think?
Well, it kind of depends on the range, the volume range of different people using it. So depending on how you're processing that channel within the mixer, if you're applying compression or noise gating or something, the threshold of those processes will change if the input level changes. Like your compression won't engage if the level is too low. the noise gate won't open if the input level is too low. So at some point, you do need to ride the preamp gain to make sure that it's in the proper range. And then you also keep a finger on the fader to make sure that you're hitting your output level.
Let's go to the next question.
Next question comes in from Morgan Price in Victoria, British Columbia. We are running a series of one-off remote Zoom workshops with clinics across our province. What USB mic would you send out to them to help improve audio? Assume 5 to 15 people around a table at one end, and facilitators are remotely based.
Ooh, if you're trying to pick up 5 to 15 people with one microphone, that's going to be a big challenge around a table. Marty, can you give them a little assistance here?
Yeah, that's a tough one because so if the 5 to 15 people around the table is something that you're going to do very often and you're going to do from the same room, one of the worst things you can do is put down, say, a conference microphone in the middle of the table. It's just not going to cut it. The best way to handle this is to put in a beam-forming microphone in the room that will isolate people as they're talking and suppress sounds from other places in the room. This is the purpose of these microphones. They form a beam. They detect the location, the direction of a sound source of people talking, and it actually creates a cardioid beam, a microphone beam in that direction, and ignores or rejects sound from other directions. That's the way you're going to get isolation and better intelligibility and articulation from people talking.
Let's go to our next question.
Those things also kind of reduce the room reflections, the effective room reflections. And so, if you're going to do that, that's the best way to do it. In terms of the remote facilitators, we have USB microphones that we put on stands like this one, and that would be, common sense is get the microphone as close to the people as possible and be a directional microphone and make sure that the desktop space in the room is fairly quiet. The typical things that we always talk about.
There you go. Next question.
Next one comes in from Dan Huber in Erie, Pennsylvania. He says, I have a poly room that I can join a Teams meeting or a Zoom meeting with a room connector bridge license. When I share audio through a Zoom meeting, it's fine. But through a Teams meeting, audio cuts out after a few seconds.
I think people had mentioned something like this before. I wonder if that's a Polycom mic in the middle of a table or something like that. But regardless, that's something about Teams and the audio functioning of it. And again, I think I've heard people talk about this. Our real integrator folks who talk about things like setting up those meetings, particularly Zoom things, are not on board today. So unfortunately, Dan, I don't think we're going to be able to give you a ton of help on this, but I have heard of it before. I don't think you're alone in this, so I would do some searching on Google and things like that for see if you can get some information, or come back, bring this question back another day when we have a slightly different panel here. Next question.
Next one comes in from Samuel Nordvik in Norway. He says, when I use my Linsoul KZ ZS10 in-ear monitors with the Røde Streamer X, I get a terrible hum. When using Audio-Technica over-ear headphones, I get a clean signal. Some other earbuds have a slight hums, and some do not. What could be the reason?
Craig Kadoki.
The first thing that I would look at would be, the first thing that comes to mind is whether the connector on the headphones is a TRS or TRRS. If it's something that's designed, if the cable is designed to have a mic in it, and the streamer that you're plugging into isn't designed to take a mic on that headphone cable, the pins might not be aligning. That could be causing it. That's the first thing I'd look at.
Next question.
Next one comes in from Paul Buchanan in Columbus, Ohio. Over the weekend, I attended a concert where the stage was a boat dock, and the audience watched from boats. The audio was rough, and I know it depends, but in general, how would you adjust the setup and execution compared with a traditional venue?
It's a Jimmy Buffett question. Chris Gillen, jealous.
No, you're good. It's without being there, it's hard for me to tell exactly. But I'll tell you this: usually with outdoor concerts and things like that are thrown up in kind of a makeshift form like that is you may have a row, literally a wall of buildings on one side and not the other. So you may be hearing just a giant reflection that's happening literally where things are echoing off of like glass walls of surrounding buildings or just infrastructure. So it really just depends. But just know that it's not a very controllable environment like it is in a venue.
Marty, you have some thoughts?
Yeah, so this is a tough one because, in most concert situations, the audience area is well defined and you know how to set up your loudspeakers to cover that area. But on the water with boats, you could have people anywhere. And then you also, this is a barge that actually, it has a bridge. You can see on the right side, there's a bridge for the land connection, and that's where they have power. If you're in a totally floating barge, then you need to be able to generate power on the barge, and you need to have enough power to run your sound system. And the sound system needs to cover a very broad area, both in width and in depth, and that's something that's not easy to do.
Let's go to the next question.
Next question comes in from Robert White in Jacksonville, Florida. If using a 2-channel EQ on an analog mixer, is it possible to use one channel for mains and the other channel for stage monitors?
Chris Gillen.
So just one thing to just bear in mind with that, I'm assuming you're talking about like just a stereographic EQ. If you are using a mono system, like if your whole PA is mono and you have one monitor mix to do, then you can do that. Otherwise, you do not have the stuff, because remember, if you got a stereo PA, both of those channels, it's going to be a left and a right, and then you're going to need another channel for each one of those mono mixes that you're doing. So just bear that in mind.
We had a lot of questions today, still do. Sadly, we're going to have to send some of them back to you. I've got a few announcements I have to make here before the top of the hour. Remember, this is why your voting is always incredibly important. Thank you, though, to everyone who put questions in. If we are sending them back to you, they will show up in your notes field. Please come back another day. If you want to hold off for an entire week, if your question isn't critical, then just go ahead and pop it in next Wednesday when we do another audio-specific thing. But you can also pop it in any day, and depending on who's here, hopefully we'll give you the information you need. Couple of things coming up. The Squares TV Application Lab today at 10 a.m. Pacific Time. You can learn about Shoot Pro, Video Pencil, and all the things from Squares. Thursday, September 15th, tomorrow, the MIMO Live Lab, our weekly community meeting to share information around that. The Isadora Lab is also going to take place tomorrow. Saturday, Alex is going to be here answering questions for interested panelists. So if you're interested in getting on the panel and becoming part of the office hours experience, Saturday coming up is your day. Extra hours is something we've been doing a good little bit recently. That's Monday nights, and that is for those of you on other parts of the world or your friends in other parts of the world who don't have access to our normal our normal everyday morning meeting. That takes place at 6 p.m. Pacific time in the U.S., so you can translate that into your local time. They've been fascinating extra hours discussions. It's kind of a different thing. We use a different back end, and so check that out. Tomorrow, Thursday on the show, NLE plugins and extensions. So we'll be talking about the things that nonlinear editors use to pop into their systems to add extra capabilities and things like that to customize their workflows. So we'll be discussing how that works. Then on Friday, the home studio evolution from beginner to broadcast. What if you could transform your home studio into a broadcast quality setup? And a lot of people around office hours knows this because we have done pretty much that. Most of the people you're seeing and listening to here come in every day and have a pretty high quality setup for being able to do all sorts of broadcasting. So that's going to happen on Friday, September 6th. And then the final thing I get to talk to you about is our weekend content. And it's really a little different from our daily shows. every weekend we kind of dial things back a little bit and have more philosophical discussions. Saturday, September 7th, is going to be a live Q&A section where you can ask questions, vote, and watch the show. Sunday is a definite difference because on Sunday we do a little more introspection, which means we talk about how the show operates on the back end. It is not broadcast, which means that we are free to give out answers that may be a little more speculative or just talk about the philosophy of how we do things. You can watch that in a variety of ways. It's live only. You can watch it in Mukana or join the Zoom production studio for the webinar from that, or listen on the Office Hours radio app. So one last little quick note. Don't forget about Office Hours. Donate. We'll be right back.